I'm Alana from Kids Read to Kids, and we are on Chapter 8 of Read All About It by Valerie Tripp. I've got Kit, my American Girl reading doll, here with me, so let's get started. Kit's Hard Times. Kit! Dad gasped. Kit couldn't breathe. She felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Shock, disbelief, and a sickening feeling of terrible shame shot through her as she stared at Dad. Suddenly, Kit could bear no more. She pushed past Ruthie and Sterling and bolted through the swinging doors. She ran through the kitchen and past the stoves with huge steaming kettles of soup. She burst out the back door into the alley. When she was outside, her legs felt wobbly, and she sagged against the hard brick wall. In a moment, Ruthie and Sterling were beside her. "Kit?" said Ruthie gently. "Are you okay?" Kit nodded. "Is my dad still?" she began. "Your dad left," said Ruthie. "He said he'd talk to you at home." Kit took a shaky breath. "Come on," said Ruthie. "Let's go." Sterling grabbed the wagon handle, and they started down the alley with the empty wagon rattling and banging noisily behind them. Slowly, without talking, the three of them walked together until they came to the end of Ruthie's driveway. They stopped next to the stack of lumber left over from the new garage, and Ruthie turned to Kit. "Listen," she said. "Everything's going to be all right." "All right," Kit repeated. She shivered. "No, Ruthie," she said. "Everything's not going to be all right. My father hasn't been having job interviews. He's been going to a soup kitchen. He had to, just to get something to eat, to get food for our family to eat." Kit's voice shook. "Dad's not going to get a job here in Cincinnati. Maybe he would have a better chance of finding one in Chicago. I guess," Kit faltered, then went on. "I guess now I hope that he will go." "No, you don't," said Sterling in his husky tone. Kit frowned. "What do you know about what I want?" she asked. "Your father is in Chicago sending you letters with money stuck in them." "No," said Sterling. His gray eyes looked straight at Kit. "He isn't." "What are you talking about?" asked Kit. "I saw the money." "That was my $20, Sterling said. "My father gave it to me before he left. He told me to save it for an emergency." Sterling sighed, and then he poured out the whole story. "My mother hasn't been able to pay any rent since we moved in," he said. "I offered her the $20 lots of times, but she always said no. Then a few weeks ago, she told me that we were going to have to leave your house. I knew it was because she was ashamed to stay any longer without paying. She wouldn't feel so bad if she could help with the housework, but your mother won't let her. I figured if I could trick her into taking the $20, she might use it for rent, so I made her think it came in a letter from my father." Kit squinted at Sterling, trying to understand. "You sneaked the money into the letter?" she asked. Sterling shook his head. "No," he said. "It's worse than that." He paused. "I wrote the letter myself. I typed it on your typewriter." "What?" Kit and Ruthie asked together. "The truth," Sterling hesitated. "The truth is, I don't know where my father is," he said, "but I'm pretty sure he's never coming back here to my mother and me. He flew the coop, as Roger said. So that's how I know that you don't want your dad to go away, Kit. No matter what, it's better to have your dad at home. No matter how bad or hopeless things are, you don't want him to leave." Kit sat down hard in the wagon. "Sterling," said Ruthie, "you'd better tell your mom what you did." Sterling nodded. It was as if he'd used up all his words. Ruthie waved goodbye and went inside her house. Kit stood up tiredly. As she trudged home with the wagon and Sterling behind her, a new thought presented itself. When Sterling tells his mother about the letter and the money, they'll leave. They won't live here in our house anymore. Of course, Kit had wanted Sterling and his fuss-budgety mother to leave ever since they'd arrived. But now, it was very peculiar. Now that it was about to happen, Kit did not feel glad. She opened her front door and stood in the hall, which smelled of wet wool coats, and watched Sterling head upstairs to the room he and his mother shared. "Is that you, Lammy?" Mrs. Howard called. "Did you wipe your feet?" Sterling looked back over his shoulder at Kit, and a quick silvery smile slipped across his face. Then he turned away and climbed the rest of the stairs. Slowly, Kit took off her coat and headed upstairs to change out of her school clothes. As she passed by Mother and Dad's room, the door opened. "Kit," said Dad. Come in here, please. I'd like to talk to you. Kit went in and stood facing Dad. I've already told your mother about what happened today, said Dad. I owed her an apology, and I owe you and Charlie one too. I'm sorry I misled all of you. I should have told you what I was really doing. I've been going to the soup kitchen for weeks now to eat and to get food to bring home. It was the only way I could contribute to the household. Are we really that poor? Kit whispered. Yes, said Dad. We are, but I didn't want any of you to know. That's why I pretended to not be hungry here at home. I'd have my lunch at the soup kitchen, and then I could give my breakfast or dinner away to make our groceries stretch further. Dad put his hand on Kit's shoulder. I shouldn't have led you to believe that I'd find a job here in Cincinnati. I guess my excuse is that I wanted it to be true. But, said Dad, it's time for me, for all of us, to face the truth. And the truth is that there's no point in studying the want ads in the newspaper every day for a job that's never going to appear. So your mother and I have decided. I'm going to Chicago. Oh, Dad, cried Kit. You're not going to Chicago because of that letter from Sterling's father, are you? That letter! Dad held up his hand to stop her. I'm going, he said, because there's really no alternative. We don't have room in the house to take in as many boarders as we need. If I go to Chicago, maybe I can find a job and send money home. I don't want you to go, Dad, Kit said desperately. You'll have to write to me and tell me what happens after I leave, Dad said, smiling a small smile. It'll be like the old days. Remember the newspapers you used to make for me? I loved them so much. When I'm gone, will you write newspapers and send them to me so I won't feel so far away? Kit nodded slowly. That's my girl, said Dad. You were my reporter during the good times. I need you to be my reporter during the hard times, too. Hard times, thought Kit dully as she left Dad and walked down the hallway. Kit heard Miss Hart and Miss Finney laughing in their room and Mr. Peck teaching Charlie to play his double bass fiddle. Mother needed her to set the table for dinner and scrub the potatoes and put them in the oven to bake. Then there was laundry to iron and fold and put away, all before dinner. This is it, Kit thought. This is the truth of my life now. With heavy, defeated steps, Kit climbed the stairs to the attic. How foolish she had been to think that her life was going to go back to the way it used to be. Kit sank into her desk chair. She had been wrong about so many things. Instead of resenting the boarders, she should have been grateful for them. Instead of wanting them to leave, she should have been trying to figure out a way to fit more boarders into the house. Because Kit felt pinpricks of fear up her spine, because there was no guarantee that Dad would be able to find a job in Chicago either. What would become of her family? How would they have enough money for food and clothes and heat? Would they be so poor they'd be kicked out of their house? Oh, I wish we had room for more boarders, Kit thought passionately. Then Dad could stay. Kit felt a drop of water on her hand. She looked up and saw a new leak in the roof, right above her desk. Drops of water plopped onto the papers next to her. Kit saw the drops had blurred one of her treehouse sketches. Oh well, what difference does it make, she thought, shoving the papers aside. Dad won't be here to build it. There's no use for the sketch or Ruthie's lumber now. Kit sat bolt upright. Unless... Wait a minute. Treehouse? Boarding house? Suddenly, Kit had an idea. As soon as Kit and Mother were alone in the kitchen washing the dishes after dinner, Kit said, Mother, I've been thinking. Ruthie's father has a stack of lumber left over from their new garage. He said Ruthie and I could have it to build a new treehouse. But I bet he wouldn't mind if we used lumber to fix up Charlie's sleeping porch instead. If we made it nice enough, then maybe Mr. Peck would move in with Charlie. And then? Mother asked. Then we can put 2 new boarders in Mr. Peck's room, said Kit. We could certainly use the money, said Mother. She sighed tiredly. But I just don't know if I could handle the extra work that 2 more boarders would be. Her face looked sad, especially after your father leaves. How about asking Mrs. Howard to help you with the housework instead of paying rent? Asked Kit. Mrs. Howard is a crackerjack cleaner. Mother shook her head. I'm not sure she'd agree to that, she said. Oh, I think she would, said Kit. Sterling said she wants to help. Mother was quiet for a thoughtful moment. Then she said, Kit, dear, it's very ingenious of you to have thought of all this, and it would be very nice of you and Ruthie to sacrifice your treehouse for lumber. But I'm afraid lumber for the renovation is not our only problem. We don't have money to pay a carpenter. Who'd do the work? Dad could do it, said Kit. He's great at building things. Yes, agreed Mother, but the idea would have to be presented to him in just the right way. Now that he's decided to go, it'll be hard to change his mind. Kit grinned from ear to ear. You leave that to me, she said, full of enthusiasm. I have a great plan. Mother smiled. All right, she said, give it a try. Thanks, Mother, said Kit. She hugged Mother and then darted out the kitchen door and flew up the stairs 2 at a time. She couldn't carry out her plan alone, but she knew just whom to ask for help. Kit knocked on Sterling's door. Yes, said Mrs. Howard. When she opened the door, Kit saw that the room was neat as a pin. May I speak to Sterling? Asked Kit. Mrs. Howard began to say no. He's very tired But then Sterling appeared from behind his mother. Sterling, said Kit, looking straight at him, will you help me? Yes, said Sterling immediately. It was as though he'd been waiting for Kit's question for a long time. The next morning, when Dad sat down to breakfast, this is what he saw at his place. The Hard Times News. Special Thanksgiving Day edition. Editor, Kit Kittredge. Artist, Sterling Howard. Advisor, Margaret Kittredge. Wanted, tall bearded man to share sleeping porch with early rising, agreeable teenager. Must play double bass and drink coffee. Call Charlie Kittredge. Wanted, do you have interesting, exciting stories to tell about adventures in nursing? If so, I'd like to hear them. Call Kit Kittredge. Wanted immediately. Talented handyman to fix sleeping porch so it will sleep too. Great working conditions. Call the Kittredge family. Wanted, neat and tidy lady to help with housekeeping in exchange for room and board. Call Margaret Kittredge. Wanted, kids with wagon to haul away leftover lumber suitable for use in fixing sleeping porch. Call Ruthie Smithens. Kit, Sterling, and Mother sat on the edges of their seats watching Dad read the Hard Times News. When he finished reading, Dad glanced at Mother over the top of the paper with a questioning look. Mother smiled and nodded, and then Dad smiled too. Well, said Dad, patting the paper, look at this. There's a construction job in these want ads. A boarding house needs to expand. It's right here in Cincinnati, close to home. Dad winked at Kit. In fact, it is at home. It's the perfect job for me. Kit ran to Dad and hugged him. So you'll stay then? She asked. Yes, said Dad. I'll go talk to Ruthie's father about the leftover lumber today. He handed Kit's newspaper to Mrs. Howard. I think there's a job here that might interest you, Mrs. Howard, he said. Mrs. Howard read the want ads and exclaimed, My land! So there is! She turned to Mother. I'd love to help you with the housekeeping, she said. I'm very good at dusting. I've noticed that the upstairs hallway, that's Kit's job, Mother interrupted politely. But with 2 more boarders moving in soon, there'll be plenty to do. I'll be glad to have your help. I'll start today, said Mrs. Howard. Kit stood next to Dad and looked around the breakfast table as the newspaper was passed from hand to hand. Charlie and Mr. Peck were laughing and talking together about being roommates. Miss Hart and Miss Finney were beaming at Kit, looking as if they were brimming over with stories to tell. Suddenly, she heard a quiet voice next to her say, Happy Thanksgiving, Kit. It was Sterling. His gray eyes were shining. Kit smiled. Happy Thanksgiving, Sterling, she said. That's the end of Chapter 8. Head to the next video for Chapter 9, and once again, head to kidsreadtokids.com for our lesson plans to this very book and for all of our other resources. Happy reading!